Hi, I'm Jen from House One, and today I'm showing how I tiled my fireplace, hearth, and surround. I'm in the process of renovating my entire fireplace wall to include new built-ins and to move the television up above the fireplace. In part one of this project, I removed my mantle so I could cut it shorter and modernize it with new molding. I also demoed the tile on the fireplace, surround, and hearth. I realized my substrates were in pretty rough condition, so I replaced the drywall on the wall and prepped the floor with cement board. To see more of that process, click the links below this video. Now with my substrates clean, I'm ready for tile. For this project, I installed a marble tile in a mesh-backed herringbone pattern on the surround and 3x6 individual subway tiles on the hearth. As a quick note, I'll say that the herringbone pattern was not the easiest to install. It took precision to make the smaller cuts and to keep the pattern aligned during install. Having said that, I love the way that it looks, and I'm still glad that I chose it. To get started, I picked up the mortar to set the tile. I'm using a bag of mortar made for use with natural stone tiles. Sometimes you can get away with using an easy-to-use pre-mixed option. They're sold as modified thin set, mastic, or even tile adhesive. But there's oftentimes a chemical in these products that can leach into a natural stone like the marble tile I'll be using. So it's better to stick with a mortar that's activated by water and then have that water expel as the product cures. Next, I picked up a bag of grout marked unsanded to be sure I don't scratch the finish on my tiles when I wipe them clean. With my supplies home, I was ready to check the layout of my tile. For the hearth, I laid the individual tiles front to back, inserting 1/8 inch spacers between the tiles to figure out the number of rows. Because this was a smaller project, I decided to actually lay out all of the tiles and took some time to stagger the darker tiles and remove any blemished tiles. I then stacked them up in rows to the side of the hearth. For the surround, I went a bit overboard and cut out a cardboard template so I could lay it flat and get a rough layout of my mosaic sheets. This can also be done on the floor with painter's tape and really help me get a visual of the design. After a quick final cleaning, I marked the center line on the hearth and got ready to mix my mortar. Because I'm renting a tile saw and I only wanted to rent it for a short period of time in order to save money, I opted to install the field tiles on the hearth all the way up to where I needed to start making cuts on the first day. I then let those tiles cure overnight so that I could work on that surface the next day without worrying about disturbing the tiles, which is typically the reason why you would start with the surround and then work your way down to the hearth. Also, by doing this, I was able to spend the one day I had with the tile saw really concentrating on the cuts for the surround and then quickly making those little trims for the hearth tiles. For the small hearth, I only wanted to mix a half bag of my mortar. So I called the manufacturer to get the ratio, which was 3 parts mortar and 1 part water. So I poured 1 container of water into the bucket and then 3 containers of mortar. Using a paddle mixer fitted into my drill, I slowly mixed the mortar to a peanut butter consistency. I let it rest for 10 minutes and then mixed it again. I then placed the paddle mixer into a bucket of clean water and ran it for a rinse to remove all of the mortar. Starting to one side of the center line, I smoothed the mortar onto the hearth with the flat edge of the trowel, and then used the notch side of the trowel to comb the ridges into the mortar. I positioned the first tile in place to the right of the center line, and then gave it a nudge front to back to set it into the ridges. I then continued placing the rest of the tiles in the row using the spacers. When I got to the second row, I offset my first tile by half the width of the tile to create a brick pattern. And remember that half the width also accounts for the width of the 1/8 inch wide joint. I continued placing each row until I reached the edge where a tile needed to be cut, working my way to the right side and then to the front edge of the hearth. That night, I rented the tile saw for a 24-hour period. I brought the tile saw home while I had helped to unload it knowing that it's a pretty heavy saw and it does require 2 people to lift. That way I could also get the saw completely set up so that as soon as I got up in the morning, I was ready to go. All right, so this is the medium tile saw from Home Depot rental. It has a sliding deck on it, which holds 12 by 12 tiles. And since I'm cutting a 12 by 12 sheet of mosaic, this is gonna make it really easy for the whole sheet to lay on there and cut really smooth. So this slides, the blade stays still, so you just slide this through, cut all your tiles. The sliding deck makes it really easy, and then you just fill up the reservoir with water. There's a pump back there that will feed water down through the blade, and I am ready to cut. As a last bit of prep, I also covered the firebox and hearth with plastic secured with painter's tape to guard against any falling mortar during the install. To tile this around, I started in an upper corner so I could force a nice looking alignment on both the leg and the top section. To do this, I squared off the top edge and then the side edge of a sheet and cut along the inside corner that fell over the firebox. To install the tile, I mixed the mortar in the same way as the day before and then applied it to the surround with the smooth edge of the trowel. I combed in horizontal ridges and then pressed the tile sheet into place. With my alignment set, I could now move on to cutting all of the pieces on the right leg to width, including a little bit of spacing on either side for a grout line. Through some trial and error, I found that my mosaic tiles were falling into the valley of the tile saw's deck. So I placed a board under the tile, adjusted the blade a bit higher so that it just touched the board, and then cut the leg pieces to width. Again, I combed the mortar onto the surround and then pressed the sheets into place. When I got to the bottom of the leg, I measured and cut the bottom edge square and then installed the sheet. Next, I moved to cutting and installing the top strip of the surround, applying and combing the mortar and then pressing the tiles into place, paying special attention to closing the gap between the sheets. I then worked my way down the left leg, measured for the last sheet, and then cut and pressed it into place. With the hardest part complete, I was feeling pretty good and moved on to the straightforward task of trimming the hearth tiles. Most of the tiles needed to just be trimmed a little shorter, but 2 tiles needed to wrap the corner of the mantle. So I made 2 passes on the saw to create the L-shaped pieces. With my pieces sized, I back buttered them with mortar, combed a groove, set them into place, and then added spacers. The tile cutting part of this process was a complete success, but it did take a lot of time to get everything just right. So I ended up returning the tile saw right at the end of the day, but then I could leave the tiles to set undisturbed overnight. The next day I removed the spacers and covered the hearth with plastic so I could protect it while I grouted the surround. I mixed the grout as specified on the packaging, using a paddle mixer. Using a grout float, I pressed the grout into the joints and then swept over the area at an angle to remove the excess. I kept a dry rag handy to clean the metal trim around the firebox and to wipe the inside walls of the mantle. Next, I moved to the hearth, again pressing the grout into the joints on a diagonal and running the float over the tile to remove the excess. After 20 minutes, I cleaned the tiles with a damp sponge. It's important to work with a clean bucket of water and make sure that you wring out the sponge so you don't introduce too much new water to the grout. When the surround was fully grouted, I removed the plastic and wiped all the edges clean. Again, I left the tile and grout to set undisturbed overnight, though most grout packaging does say that you can clean the tiles within a couple of hours. On the last day, I wiped the tiles clean with a microfiber cloth to buff off the haze. I wiped them down one last time with a damp cloth and then waited a few days before spraying and wiping on a few coats of sealer for extra protection. To finish this part of the process, I replaced the floor trim, and reinstall the baseboard molding on the legs of the mantle to complete the look. With the mantle updated and the new tile installed, I can now get to work on the built-ins that will sit on either side. For more information about that project, click the link below. And for more renovation and woodworking projects, visit House One. I'm Jenn Largesse, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. This Old House has got a video for just about every home improvement project, so be sure to check out the others. And if you like what you see, click on the subscribe button to make sure that you get our newest videos right in your feed.